The snow came down soft that Friday morning. Not the kind that sticks and causes accidents. The quiet kind. The kind that muffles sound and makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. David Carter drove his '09 Civic into the parking lot of First Meridian Bank at 9:14 a.m. He checked the time twice. He always checked the time twice. He wore his best coat wool, charcoal gray. Bought from a department store rack 11 years ago and kept in a plastic garment bag ever since. He'd ironed his shirt the night before, pressed it flat on the kitchen counter because he never got around to buying an ironing board. He'd brushed his shoes, the brown leather ones with the crease across the right toe that never fully smoothed out, no matter how much polish he worked into it. He looked like a man who was trying. That was the thing about David Carter. He always tried. He'd been trying his whole life, quietly, without anyone watching, without anyone cheering him on. He tried because that was the only option he'd ever been given. He pulled the envelope from his inside breast pocket and checked it one more time. The certified check was there. $20,000 even, drawn from a savings account he'd been feeding for 9 years. One direct deposit at a time, one skipped lunch at a time, one winter without turning the heat above 62 degrees at a time. He needed to process it as a cashier's check today. The deadline for the property tax lien on his sister Margaret's house was 5 p.m. Margaret had 3 kids under 10 and a husband who'd walked out 14 months ago. The county had sent the final notice. David had called the attorney's office. He knew exactly what needed to happen and in what order. He'd done his research. He always did his research. He pushed through the glass door and felt the blast of warm air hit him. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and fresh coffee. A security guard nodded at him from near the entrance. David nodded back. The teller line had 4 people ahead of him. He stood and waited without fidgeting. He watched the clock above the teller windows. He noticed the potted plant in the corner needed water. When he reached the window, the teller, a young woman, maybe 23, with her hair pulled back very tight, looked at him the way certain people look at strangers on the street when they're trying to decide something about them. "I need to process a cashier's check," David said. He slid the envelope across the counter. "For property tax purposes. There's a lien deadline today." The teller opened the envelope and looked at the check. Something shifted in her expression. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I'll need to verify the account." "Of course," David said. She typed something, looked at her screen, typed again. "Can you give me one moment?" She walked away from the window. David watched her cross the lobby to a glass-walled office near the back. A man sat inside, mid-40s, broad in the shoulders. His hair was parted with a ruler, and his shirt was the brightest white David had seen outside of a detergent commercial. He looked up from his desk when the teller knocked on the door. His name, David would later learn, was Regional Branch Manager Clifford Harmon. They spoke for less than 30 seconds. Then Harmon stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked across the lobby. He walked like a man who expected people to move out of his way. David watched him come. Harmon stopped at the counter. He picked up the check with 2 fingers, like he was handling something he wasn't sure was clean. He looked at it. Then he looked at David. "Where did you get this?" he asked. David felt something go still inside him. He recognized the tone. He'd heard it before in other banks, in other offices, in car dealerships and doctors' waiting rooms. The tone that meant, "I've already decided something about you." "It's from my savings account," David said. "Meridian Bank, account ending in 4,471. I've been a customer here for 16 years. Harmon didn't look at his screen. He didn't verify anything. He just kept looking at David with that expression, the one that wasn't quite a smirk but was getting there. 16 years, Harmon said, as though the number were mildly amusing. "That's right. And you're looking to process a $20,000 cashier's check this morning for a property tax lien. There's a deadline at 5 p.m. What I need, Harmon said, cutting him off cleanly, is to run a full verification on any check of this size. Our policy requires." "I understand the policy," David said. "I'm happy to provide whatever documentation you need." I have my ID, my account number, Social Security. That's not what I'm concerned about. The lobby had gone quiet, not entirely. The ambient sounds were still their keyboards, a phone ringing somewhere in the back, the low murmur of other conversations, but the specific area around the counter had developed its own pocket of silence. 3 people in the teller line were watching. Harmon looked at David for a moment longer. Then, very deliberately, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a small pen. He clicked it once, and then, slowly, methodically, he tore the check in half. The sound was soft, paper on paper. It was over in 2 seconds. He set both halves on the counter. Our compliance team will need to review this account before we can process anything of this magnitude, Harmon said. Standard procedure. He said it like he was reading from a pamphlet. David looked at the 2 halves of the check sitting on the marble counter. The signature he'd practiced the night before, now split down the middle. That's a certified check, David said. His voice was very level. You destroyed a certified financial instrument. We can reissue if the review clears. The deadline is 5 o'clock. Harmon shrugged. The shrug of a man who does not concern himself with other people's deadlines. Call your daughter, Harmon said. He smiled at the teller beside him, including her in the joke. If she can even afford this. The teller looked away. But someone in the waiting area laughed a short, automatic sound. Quickly swallowed. David looked at Harmon for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked down at the counter. He reached out and picked up the first half of the check. Then the second. He squared them carefully, the way a man squares papers before he puts them in a folder. He slid them back into the envelope and tucked the envelope inside his breast pocket. He said nothing. He took out his phone. There were things David Carter had never told anyone. He had never told anyone that in the winter of 2003, when his daughter was 9 years old and he was working 2 jobs, warehouse loader by day, overnight security by night, he had gone 6 weeks eating 1 full meal a day so that she could eat 2. He'd kept a protein bar in his jacket pocket and called it lunch and told himself it was enough. He had never told anyone that on the night his wife Patricia passed, the 14th of November 2004, a Tuesday, at 11:47 p.m., he had sat in the hospital parking garage for 2 hours before going home because he didn't know how to walk through the front door and tell his 10-year-old daughter that the one other person who made the world make sense was gone. He had never told anyone that he'd cried in his car every morning for 4 months after that, alone in the driveway before work, so that when he walked back inside to wake Emily up and make her breakfast, he'd already put everything away in its box and he could just be her father. Just her steady, reliable, slightly too quiet father who burned toast about half the time and always remembered which color folder was for which subject. He was not a dramatic man. He didn't think of himself as particularly interesting. He had worked for 31 years as a licensed electrician. He had built a reputation for showing up on time and doing good work and not complaining. He had saved carefully. He had given to his church when he could. He had looked after his sister Margaret when she needed looking after. He had taught his daughter one thing above all others. It happened when Emily was 11. She'd come home from school with a torn notebook, crying. Some older girls had laughed at her shoes, second-hand sneakers from the church donation box. They'd made a production of it. Look at her shoes. Look at her shoes. David had sat with her at the kitchen table. He'd made her hot chocolate, the real kind, milk on the stove, not the packet kind. And he had said, quietly, without drama, don't prove anything to people who've already decided to mock you. It won't change their minds. Let time answer. Emily had looked at him with those big dark eyes she'd inherited from Patricia. What does time answer? She'd asked. Everything, he'd said. He'd believed it then. He still believed it now, standing in the lobby of First Meridian Bank with half a check in his pocket and a crowd of strangers watching him. He pressed dial. It rang twice. Dad. Her voice was the same as it had always been, warm, slightly husky, alert. She could sound asleep at 2 a.m. and still awake in the same breath. Hey, Em. He kept his voice quiet, He turned slightly away from the lobby. "I'm sorry to call during your morning. Don't apologize. What's going on?" He told her, briefly, precisely, the way he always told stories, the relevant facts in order, no embellishment. When he finished, there was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. Her voice, when it came back, had shifted register. The warmth was still there. Underneath. But it was underneath something else now. "Where are you exactly?" "First Meridian. Downtown branch. Harmon Street location." Another pause. "Stay there," she said. "Don't go anywhere. Don't sign anything. Emily. Dad." Just the one word. Quietly. With absolute certainty, he knew that voice. He'd heard it develop over 32 years. It was the voice that had argued her way into a college scholarship at 17, and argued her way through law school at 24, and argued her way through 2 city council campaigns and 1 mayoral race that everyone said she was too young to win. It was, he sometimes thought, his voice. The one he'd swallowed for 30 years. She'd inherited it, and learned to use it out loud. "Okay," he said. "I'm coming." The line went quiet. Across town, on the 8th floor of City Hall, Deputy Chief of Staff Renata Oakes was going over the Tuesday briefing schedule when she heard Mayor Carter push back her chair. Renata looked up. Emily Carter was already standing, her blazer off the back of the chair, sliding her arms into the sleeves. "Clear my 10 o'clock, Emily said. Renata didn't move for half a second. "The Regional Infrastructure Summit is, move it to 11. Push the 11 to 1:30. Emily picked up her phone. "Get Marcus to bring the car around. Not the back entrance. The front. Mayor, if I could just please, Renata." The please was what stopped Renata. Emily Carter did not say please when she was doing politics. She said please when she meant it. Renata reached for her phone. David put his phone back in his pocket. He looked around the lobby. He chose a seat near the wall, the one with the clearest sight line to both the entrance and the teller counters. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He waited. The teller who'd helped him earlier busied herself with papers at her station, not looking in his direction. Another teller, older, male, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, glanced over once and then quickly away. Harmon had retreated to his office. Through the glass wall, David could see him on the phone. His posture was relaxed. He was not worried. David had met men like Clifford Harmon many times in his life. Not the same man, different names, different buildings, different cities, but the same fundamental assumption that people who looked like David Carter, who drove cars like David Carter's car, who wore coats with slightly worn elbows like David Carter's coat, those people did not need to be taken seriously. They could be dismissed, redirected, made to feel small until they went away. Most of the time, it worked. A man near the door, expensive suit, leather briefcase, watching all of this from the corner of his eye, leaned slightly toward the woman beside him and said something in a low voice. She glanced at David and then looked away. David looked at the clock above the teller windows. 9:47 a.m. He thought about Margaret. He thought about her kids Connor and Lily and the baby, Owen. He thought about the county notice she'd called him crying about 3 weeks ago, and how she'd said she was sorry. She was so sorry, she should have handled it herself. "Don't apologize," he'd told her. "That's what family is for." He sat and kept his hands folded and watched the clock. 9:47 a.m. Harmon came back out of his office. He walked to the teller window, said something to the teller with the tight hair, and they both looked in David's direction. The teller said something back. Harmon smiled. He walked over to where David was sitting. "Mr. Carter," he said it pleasantly, like they were old colleagues running into each other. "I want to be clear that our compliance process typically takes 48 to 72 hours. I wouldn't want you to have unrealistic expectations about." "I'm fine waiting," David said. Harmon blinked. That wasn't the answer he'd expected. "The branch closes at 5. "I know." Harmon studied him for a moment. Then he looked at the envelope in David's pocket, just visible at the top of his breast pocket, and something moved across his face, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity or discomfort. Let me guess, Harmon said, dropping his voice low enough that only David and the two nearest people could hear. Is she coming to bail you out? Some waitress somewhere? Nobody laughed this time. David looked at him steadily. She's coming, David said. The sound came first. Not a siren. Something quieter than that. The low-engine purr of large vehicles moving in coordinated formation. Then the brief whoop of a police escort that quieted as quickly as it began. 3 black SUVs pulled to the curb directly in front of First Meridian Bank. Inside the lobby, heads turned toward the windows. The ambient sound of the room-tilted conversations dropped off. Keyboards paused. Phones were set down. 2 officers got out of the lead vehicle first. Then a man in a dark suit, City Communications Director Marcus Webb, who moved quickly to the entrance and held the door. And then Emily Carter stepped out. She was 32 years old, and she was, at that moment, the youngest sitting mayor in the history of the city. She wore a charcoal blazer over a deep burgundy blouse. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it on work mornings. She walked like someone who had decided, a long time ago, that she was not going to slow down for rooms. She did not rush, but she moved with a kind of absolute forward momentum that parted space. The glass door opened. She walked in. The lobby went still. Not the polite, ambient quiet of a bank on a Friday morning. Something else. The specific silence of a room that has collectively, in real time, recalibrated. She scanned the lobby once. Then she found him. He was sitting in the chair by the wall, hands folded, coat still on. He was watching her come. "Dad," she said. That was all. One word. To a room full of strangers. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she would have said it on a front porch or in a kitchen doorway. Like there was no lobby and no bank and no audience. She crossed the room to him. He stood up. She put her arms around him first. He stood very still for a moment, the way he always did when he was surprised. Surprised not that she'd come, but that she'd come that fast, that certain, that completely. Then he put one hand on her back and held on. Marcus Webb had already positioned himself near the manager's office. Renata Oakes, who had ridden in the second vehicle, stood near the entrance making quiet phone calls. 2 officers waited just inside the door. The lobby had not resumed. Everyone was watching. Harmon stepped out of his office. He was still buttoning his jacket when he stopped. He looked at the woman standing in the middle of his lobby. He looked at the officers by the door. He looked at the city seal on the lapel pin that Marcus Webb wore, the one issued to senior administration staff. His face did something complicated. Emily stepped back from her father. She looked at him, just looked at him, at his coat, at the envelope pocket, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Then she turned. She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing nobody expected. They'd expected something dramatic, an announcement, an accusation, a declaration. They'd built the silence for it, held their breath for it. Instead, she simply stood in the middle of the lobby and spoke at a perfectly normal volume, the way you'd speak to someone across a dinner table. "I'd like to know," Emily Carter said, "who destroyed the certified check." Nobody moved. She waited. The patience in her stillness was different from her father's. His was the patience of a man who had learned to absorb. Hers was the patience of a woman who knew that silence, deployed correctly, was pressure. Harmon took one step forward. He smoothed his jacket. He put on his professional voice. "Mayor Carter. I wasn't aware that I had no way of knowing that. That's not what I asked." The sentence landed flat and final, like a door closing. Harmon's mouth opened and then closed. "Who destroyed the certified check?" she said again. The same words. The same volume. The same tone. No punctuation difference that a room could detect. But the repetition alone made it heavier. From the teller line, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, teller trainee, first week on the job. Name tag reading. Brett said, very quietly. Mr. Harmon did. Harmon turned toward him. Brett did not look away. Emily turned her gaze to Harmon. She looked at him the way she looked at documents that didn't add up. Not angry. Analytical. The kind of attention that is its own form of consequence. "I'm going to need to see the branch surveillance footage from the last hour," she said. She wasn't asking Harmon. She was looking at Marcus. Marcus nodded once and stepped away to make the call. Harmon made a sound something between a cough and an objection. "Mayor, with all due respect, this is a private financial institution, and any—" "Mr. Harmon." She said his name gently, almost kindly, the way you'd say a name to stop someone from making a worse decision. A certified check is a legally negotiable instrument. Willfully destroying one is a federal matter, not a branch policy question. The lobby heard that. The man with the leather briefcase near the door had his phone out now, but he wasn't doing anything with it. He was just holding it. Harmon looked at the officers by the door. He looked at his tellers. He looked at the clients, who were no longer pretending not to watch. He looked, finally, like a man who understood that the room had changed. The branch's assistant manager, a slight woman named Donna Kimball, who had been on shift since 7 and had watched the entire morning's events with visible discomfort, brought up the footage on the lobby back wall monitor in 9 minutes flat. She did it quickly, efficiently, without being asked twice. The angle was good. The camera covered the teller counter, the customer side, the full approach. You could see David Carter arriving. You could see the teller. You could see Harmon emerge from his office. The timestamp showed 9:31 a.m. You could see Harmon take the check from the counter. You could see him tear it. The footage ran 12 seconds from his picking it up to setting the two pieces down. In those 12 seconds, no compliance call was made, no supervisor was consulted, no protocol was initiated. He hadn't even looked at the computer screen. The lobby watched the screen in silence. Then the footage reached the part where Harmon leaned toward David and said something. The camera had no audio, but the lip readers and the close watchers could make out enough. "Call your daughter." David stood near the back of the gathered group. He watched the screen with a steady expression, his hands in the pockets of his charcoal coat. He looked like a man watching the weather. Donna Kimball cleared her throat. "The account was fully valid," she said, "to no one specifically. Account ending in 4,471, 16-year customer. Consistent positive balance. There were no compliance flags. The room absorbed that." Harmon had moved toward the far side of the counter. He was very still now. He had the expression of a man who is desperately trying to think of a next move and finding nothing. Emily turned to face him fully. "My father had sufficient funds," she said. "He had valid documentation. He had a legitimate, time-sensitive need. And he was treated," she paused, not for drama but because she was selecting the word carefully, with contempt. Harmon opened his mouth. "Before you speak," Emily said, "I want to be clear about something. I'm not here as the mayor right now. I'm here as David Carter's daughter." She let that sit for exactly one beat. "But I am also the mayor, and those two things, today, are going to point in exactly the same direction." She looked at Donna Kimball. "I'll need the name and direct contact for regional corporate oversight. I'll also need documentation of any other client complaints filed against this branch in the past 18 months. She glanced at Marcus. "Get the city attorney on the phone." Marcus was already dialing. Donna Kimball was already pulling files. Clifford Harmon stood behind the counter of his own branch and did not, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, know what to do with his hands. It was Marcus Webb who delivered the administrative decisions, because Emily had stepped away to make a call to her own legal team. He delivered them quietly, in Harmon's office with the door closed and 3 witnesses present. Clifford Harmon was placed on immediate administrative suspension, pending a full internal review. He would surrender his access credentials to Donna Kimball. He would not speak to any client, staff member, or member of the press until legal counsel had been arranged. The branch, this specific branch, on this specific day, would receive a formal letter from the city's Office of Business Compliance, requesting a full audit of customer service practices and incident documentation over the previous 24 months. A representative from First Meridian's corporate office, Regional Vice President Teresa Dunlap, who had received 3 simultaneous calls in the last 20 minutes, was already in her car, 40 minutes out. When Harmon emerged from his office, The lobby had thinned. A few clients had left. Some remained, seated or standing, with the air of people at a play who don't want to leave at intermission. The teller with the tight hair had her head down over her keyboard. Brett, the trainee, was drinking a cup of coffee and looking at the ceiling. Harmon walked past the counter. He paused at the edge of the lobby. David was standing near the window, looking out at the street. The snow was still coming down, same quiet, persistent way. Harmon stood there for a moment. Something moved across his face, something effortful and insufficient. He opened his mouth. David turned and looked at him. Whatever Harmon had been about to say, he didn't say it. He walked out. Emily came back into the lobby from the hallway off the rear corridor, where she'd been making her calls. She looked around once, assessed the room quickly, and came to stand beside her father. "Dunlap is on her way," she said. "You don't have to stay for that part," David said. "I know I don't." She didn't move. They stood together at the window. Outside, one of the officers was talking to Marcus near the vehicles. The snow fell on the hoods of the SUVs, and on the sidewalk, and on a planter near the door with some kind of winter-hardy shrub in it that had gone brittle and gray. "He wasn't even nervous when he did it," David said. "It was an observation, not a complaint. He was simply noting it, the thing that had struck him most, standing at that counter. The absolute lack of nervousness in Harmon's hands when he tore the check. The boredom of it." Emily looked at her father's profile. "No," she said. "He wasn't. That's the part," David said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emily understood. It wasn't the action. It was the reflexiveness. The way some things are done without even the courtesy of decision, as though the person on the other side doesn't rate the effort of cruelty, only its automation. "He's been doing it a long time," Emily said. "To people who couldn't." She stopped herself. "To people who had nowhere to go," David said. She nodded. They were quiet for a moment. Donna Kimball approached from across the lobby with a clipboard and a slight tension in her jaw. "Mayor Carter, I have the documentation you requested. I also want to say," she stopped, recalibrated. "I want to say, I should have stopped it. This morning, I saw it, and she stopped again." Her jaw moved slightly. "I'm sorry." She wasn't looking at Emily. She was looking at David. David looked at her. Then he nodded once. Slowly. The nod that means, "I hear you." Donna Kimball blinked. Then she held out the clipboard, and Marcus stepped forward to take it. Teresa Dunlap arrived at 11:22 a.m. in a black town car with First Meridian corporate plates. She was 55, silver-haired, and carried herself with the tight efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years cleaning up other people's disasters. She shook Emily's hand, then turned to David, and shook his hand too, and held it a beat longer than the professional standard. "Mr. Carter," she said, "on behalf of First Meridian Bank, I want to extend my most sincere thank you," David said. He was polite about it. He let her finish. He nodded when she finished. The cashier's check was reissued by Donna Kimball at 11:34 a.m. Verified, stamped, and processed without incident in under 7 minutes. Donna handed it to David with both hands. He thanked her. He put the new check in his inside breast pocket and patted it once, gently. Then he looked around the lobby. The remaining clients had gone. The tellers had resumed their work at the windows. The branch had the slightly rearranged quality of a room after a storm passes through everything in its approximate place. But the air not quite the same. David walked toward the exit. Emily walked beside him. At the door, he stopped. He turned and looked at the lobby one more time. The clock above the teller windows. The potted plant in the corner that needed water. The marble counter where his check had been torn. He looked at it the way he'd looked at a great many things in his life. Honestly, and without ceremony, and then he let his eyes move on. He pushed the door open. The cold hit them both. The snow was lighter now, almost translucent, drifting without direction. They stood on the sidewalk. Marcus Webb was a respectful distance away, speaking into his earpiece. The two officers were near the lead vehicle, not watching. Emily turned to her father. She wanted to say several things. She had been composing them, half-consciously, for the last 2 hours in the car, in the lobby, through the administrative procedures, through the phone calls. Words about the distance between them in recent years. She had been absorbed, swallowed whole by the work of being what she'd become, and she had called less and visited less, and been less present in the specific textures of his daily life. And she knew it and carried it. She wanted to say, "I should have been around more." She wanted to say, "I'm sorry it took something like this." She wanted to say, "I think about that kitchen table a lot. The hot chocolate. The things you told me that I've spent my whole career trying to be." What she said was, "I should have," and then her voice did something inconvenient, and she stopped. David looked at her. "You showed up," he said. She looked at him. "That's enough," he said. He said it the way he'd always said the things that mattered, quietly, directly, without making a production of them. She felt something release in her chest, something she hadn't known she'd been holding. She put her arms around him again, right there on the sidewalk, in front of the city vehicles and the officers and the people passing on the street. She held on this time. She smelled the wool of his coat, that specific smell, old and clean and familiar, that she associated entirely and irreducibly with the feeling of being taken care of, with Tuesday mornings and the wrong color folders and burned toast and hot chocolate, with a man who cried alone in a parking garage so she wouldn't have to see it. "I love you, Dad," she said into the coat. "I know, Em," he said. He said it without weight or reproach. Just fact. The simplest fact. "I love you too." They stood there a moment. The snow fell between the buildings, cutting sideways in a light wind. Then she pulled back and looked at him, and laughed a small laugh, slightly watery, and said, "We still need to get that to the county clerk by 5. He laughed too. "I know," he said. "I've got it." She looked at him. "I can have someone. I've got it, Em." She believed him. She always had. She walked back toward the lead vehicle. Marcus fell into step beside her, already briefing her on the rescheduled afternoon. She listened, nodding, already re-entering the machinery of her day. At the car door she turned once more and looked back. Her father was walking to his Civic in the parking lot. His coat was buttoned. His hands were in his pockets. He walked at the same pace he always walked, unhurried, without performance. He got to the car and paused for a moment, and she thought he might turn around. He didn't. He got in. He checked the time. She knew he would check the time twice, and he started the engine, and he backed out carefully, and he drove away toward the street. She watched the car until it turned the corner. Then she got in. The county clerk's office stamped the receipt at 2:17 p.m. Margaret Carter cried when David called to tell her. He told her not to. She cried anyway. He talked to Connor, briefly 8 years old, very serious on the phone, and Connor said, "Thank you, Uncle David," with such deliberate formality that David had to press his lips together for a moment before answering. "No need," he said. "That's what family is for." He drove home. He hung his coat carefully in the plastic garment bag. He put the brown shoes on the mat by the door and set his keys in the ceramic bowl. Emily had made him in a pottery class when she was 12. Blue glaze on the outside, a little lopsided, his favorite thing he owned. He made a sandwich. He sat at the kitchen table. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, the way winter light does, laying itself across the table in a long, pale stripe. He could see the dust in it. He watched the dust for a while. He thought about Clifford Harmon. He didn't think about him with bitterness. Bitterness was a kind of attention he'd learned not to give. He thought about him the way you think about weather. It came, it did what it did, now it's moving on. He thought about Donna Kimball and the look on her face when she'd said, "I'm sorry." He thought that she had meant it. He thought that mattered. He thought about the lobby, all those people who had watched and said nothing, and he thought that some of them, maybe, would remember this differently than the way they'd watched other lobbies on other mornings. Maybe. What David Carter did not know, and what Emily would tell him, 6 weeks later, over dinner at her house on a Sunday night, was that First Meridian's corporate office had, in the aftermath of the incident, commissioned an independent review of customer service practices across all 17 of their metro branches. The review was requested quietly. It did not make news. But Donna Kimball was promoted to interim branch director within 30 days, and the branch's customer complaint data from the previous 2 years, once the audit surfaced it, revealed a pattern that went considerably beyond Clifford Harmon. He did not learn until the same dinner that First Meridian had, 6 years prior, denied his own mortgage application not through Harmon. At a different branch, different manager, different face, same reflex, and that this original denial had been flagged as potentially discriminatory in the new review's findings. He learned this. He sat with it. He said, He put another forkful of Emily's pot roast in his mouth. Emily watched him. She was watching for the anger. She'd expected the anger. "Does it change anything?" she asked. He thought about it. "Not for me," he said. "Maybe for the next person." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a little girl and a kitchen table and a cup of hot chocolate made with real milk on the stove, not the packet kind. She thought about a man who put his grief in a box every morning, so she could have steady. She thought about 31 years of quiet trying that she had spent the last decade trying to become. She thought, "I got it from him." "The next person," she said. "That's the point," he said. He wasn't looking for a response. He was just eating dinner. He was just her father, eating dinner at her table on a Sunday night, wearing his second-best sweater, and asking if there was more bread. She got him the bread. What David Carter also didn't know, and what he never needed to know, because it was not the kind of thing he kept track of, was that over the previous 9 years, he had made a series of small, anonymous donations to 3 city programs: a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, a housing assistance initiative for families facing foreclosure, and a youth vocational training program for kids aging out of the foster system. None of the donations were large. The scholarship contributions ranged from $50 to $300, the others similar. He'd made them steadily, when he had a little extra, which wasn't always. The vocational program, as it happened, had trained the electrician who'd rewired the building where Emily had run her first campaign office. She had thanked the program publicly at the ribbon cutting for their new facility. She'd had no idea. He hadn't told her. It wouldn't have occurred to him to tell her. That wasn't the point of giving. The snow had stopped by late afternoon. David Carter stood at the kitchen window and watched the street. The light was going fast the way it does in winter, abruptly, without ceremony, like a door closing. The street lamps came on. A neighbor walked a dog past the front of his house, head down against the cold, the dog trotting with cheerful indifference to the temperature. He thought about Margaret's kids. He thought about the spring, and whether he'd have enough free weekends to help Margaret get the gutters cleaned before the ice damage set in again. He thought about Emily. He thought about how she'd looked in the lobby, the way she'd scanned the room, found him, and crossed toward him like the space between them was simply something to move through. He thought about what she'd said, "I should have," and how he'd known what came after, and how none of it needed to be said out loud between people who already knew it. There were things David Carter had never told anyone. He was not the kind of man who would have said, "I raised someone extraordinary." He would not have said that. He didn't think in those terms. But standing at the window on a winter evening, with the street lamps haloing yellow in the dark and the snow-covered yard going blue with cold, he thought about a little girl learning to read in this kitchen. He thought about driving her to her first debate competition, about sitting in the back of a community center, watching her speak to 60 people, with a clarity that made the old couple next to him lean forward. He thought about the way she'd said "Dad" in that lobby. One word. In front of all those people. Like it was the simplest, most complete thing she knew how to say. He thought, maybe I did all right. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. He turned from the window. He washed his plate. He put the kettle on. Outside, the street was quiet. The snow lay clean across everything, the hoods of cars, and the hedgerows, and the sidewalk, where his daughter had once, aged 7, drawn a hopscotch grid in chalk that washed away in 2 days and that he'd been quietly sorry to see go. He had not needed to prove anything to Clifford Harmon. He had not needed to prove anything to the tellers or the watching clients or the man with the briefcase or anyone else in that lobby. He had only needed to be exactly who he already was. And time, just like he'd told her, at a kitchen table, over hot chocolate, 21 years ago, time had answered,